And so there's actual reasoning for it. But even if you have a predilection towards it genetically, you still have to have a choice to do it. And we've got to that point where I think most people accept there is a nature aspect, but a nurture aspect as well. If you have the same exact biology that hints you towards it, but then you live in a society where it's a lot more rigid, where you probably be killed if you express your homosexuality, you probably won't explore that to get to the point where you're comfortable to actually live in practice and absorb that part of your life. Yet if you live in some that are more open, you'll do that. So we have that kind of understanding. And I just thinking this recently, like, now that's also something true with things like racism. Like, racism in that sense is as natural as homosexuality when it really comes down to it. But the prevalence of it is due to preferences, is due to nurture, due to the cultures and societies we live in. Some societies are a lot more open and welcome of racism. But I think in general now in the West, it's a lot more accepted for you to live as an open homosexual than it is as an open racist. Like, I think that's something we can completely agree on. So, and some of the very nature selective parts about racism are going to slowly and surely be selected out of nurture and nature, because it's just going to be, if you actually truly are racist, it's going to be less a chance that you're actually going to be able to reproduce both your genes and your ideology, more importantly, to create a society where your racist ideology and way of dealing with reality will make you have enough resources to reproduce more than the people who have moved past that kind of thing. And I think those are things that are kind of just my thoughts on that. I don't
know. well, just to sort of add to what you said, I had 2 points. So that was something I discussed with Adam Patrick as well. I mean, obviously very critical of the intersectional crowd, but also the Marxists. One of the points that he made, which I thought was a good way to explain it, is that they always complain that we oversimplify and that we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. Like, you've probably heard that, where if you question them, they say, "Oh, you feel uncomfortable about this." I guess because you're black, it's different. I mean, I've gotten that a lot, but the thing is, that's the case, as James Lindsay calls it. It's the iron law of woke projection. Number one, they just reduce everything to power struggles between groups. They don't want to delve deeper than that. They want to say, oh, there's a disparity between black and white people. Oh, it's racism, period, end of story. And then if you question it, they get defensive, or they accuse you of being uncomfortable, or there's some weasel way around it. And, like, for example, with the illegitimacy thing, I explained this to my brother. There's a point Wilfred Riley makes in his book. He says some people on the left say, oh, the illegitimacy among the blacks in this country, it's a legacy of slavery. Well, there's 3 problems with that. One, black families were way more stable in the past. In fact, there were some points where the black marriage rate was higher than the white marriage rate. 2, families from West Africa, particularly Nigeria and Ghana, their families are very stable. Same with families from the Caribbean. And number 3, illegitimacy has gone up among all groups, including whites. So it doesn't, so, they don't address any of that. They either say, oh, it's discrimination, or they find a way to sort of inject discrimination into the conversation. But they don't want to have this conversation because that gets into questions of culture, and then what values do those cultures have, and then what outcomes does that lead to, and then differences in intelligence and work ethic. And it's like they accuse us of not wanting to have the uncomfortable conversation. But I think that conversation makes it uncomfortable because it gets into the fact that, look, culture does matter. People are not equal, interchangeable parts of one general group. Their individualism matter, cultures matter, and even these groups are very vague in general and of themselves. But it's like they don't want to delve deeper into it like that. They just want to say, oh, it's just power struggles between groups. So,
yeah. And with that specific thing, this is something that I'm very intrigued. One of the things that intrigued me the most of this Biden's America is the pivoting and focus on Asian Americans. And that's going to explode so many of these narratives. It's going to throw a massive wrench into the works of this. It's super exciting times because like where do they fit in? Like the vice president, she's got supposedly the black part of her makes her unprivileged, but then the Asian part of her, now all of a sudden she's the Asian American president, vice president of the Asian American community need. Does that give her the privilege? And where does the white part of her come in? But just where does it actually come in when they start also seeing that, let alone how whoever they want to refer to as Asians in America do in this supposedly white society? Like, you look at the whole situation, if you're supposedly saying they've been experiencing similar levels of oppression and discrimination as blacks, then you look at the family structures in the Asian community, and you just see it's not there. When you look at part of why I don't think they're going to be able to absorb them into this kind of activism thing. A lot of this activism type of thing goes into welfare state, goes into welfare dependency. Yet I don't think there's enough Asians. I think there are certain communities and things like that where they are, like you look in San Francisco and different areas and things like that. Like the houses, like Section 8 housing, where it's like many people. But those people, some of the people are coming in that kind of situation. But I don't. Will they be enough of a long history of them enough to become a strong group of Asians, whatever. First of all, how do you group Asians together versus Orientals? There's different cultures and things that are very unique and different in that place. And then the strong connection they still have to their motherlands, there's a lot stronger of a connection than Europeans have to their motherlands. Then when most Africans leave Africa, the diaspora, they normally cut ties extreme. Like I know many people who've left who just don't even talk to people back in Kenya anymore. Like don't talk to people back in Africa. Like they're done. But the Japanese people will probably still have connections with people in Japan. The Chinese most definitely, like back and forth and things like that. The Vietnamese and the cultures are still there. And then when they come to the United States of America, they seem to balkanize. I don't know if it's balkanize. They seem to communize,
self-segregate, kind of.
Yeah, they self-segregate in a lot stronger way than I think any other community really. like the Vietnamese will hang out with the Vietnamese, the Filipinos will hang out with the Filipinos, and like they still maintain those Chinatown was run very specifically. Like they had like little Italies and things like that, or you have certain regions in like the Midwest where it's like, oh, there's a lot of Scandinavian people in here, but it's very intermixed. I don't think there's an equivalent of a Nigeria town, for example. No. In any significant city in the United States of America. Yet you have Chinatown in majority of the places, and it's not just Asian people, it's specifically Chinese people. It's just like, and then like even in New York, there was like a little Korea area, I remember.
Yeah.
There was like a Chinatown area.
Koreatown. You live near there, actually. Yeah.
It's like the Japanese area. So the Orientals have their area. Is there an India town? Like these are the kind of things where it's like
there actually was a little India for a time. I don't know if it's still around, but there used to be. It's a little unrelated, but there was a little Germany too. But I guess it sort of went defunct and just disappeared. I guess there wasn't, like you say with the Europeans. I guess historically there was more assimilation. So like there's certain areas, like I know where my dad is from, where my grandmother lives in Massachusetts, a lot of Polish people live there. So like, for example, one of our family friends, his parents met at a place called White Eagle Hall where Polish people would hang out. And if you remember, the old Polish flag had the white eagle on it. So it's a reference to that. But it's like, you still talk to everyone else. You still assimilate. Obviously, the kids learn English, all that. So it's not the segregation like you say. It's more, okay, we're sort of proud of our culture, but we get assimilated into the wider American melting pot too.
Yeah. They take on... Like it was you mentioned earlier, they take what's according to their needs, yet they still maintain the parts that they like from their culture. And one thing I think some of those cultures are a lot older, and I think that's why I was saying that the divides before World War, like the thing that really globalized the world was after the World Wars, the East-West divides kind of changed. I think you look at the start of the World War was in Poland. In the West, World War II, and then it ended in Japan with the two bombs being dropped. And my friend was talking about those two cultures seem to be making the best video games and have there's certain things about the way the cultures are. They're strong. There's strong identity of identitarianism, but they're very proud of their nature and they absorb certain things in a certain way. But there's some parallels between Polish culture and Japanese culture and certain things that you see from those places, especially compared to the neighboring areas in there. And it's kind of interesting those two places come in. But anyway, so I was thinking those are much older cultures, different kind of histories, where they're not going to want to absorb and accept some of these things that the regressives seem to say that everybody should just absorb and accept. They're going to be like, no, that's not for us. We're not going to do that. I think there's a difference with that. I think when the Europeans and the white people left Europe to come and establish the United States of America, in general, they were leaving Europeanism. And leaving those things behind and saying we're tired of the Europeanism and we want this new thing and start this new country of Americanism and start the American culture. The blacks did ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves. They, of course, had been uprooted from their cultures, sold away by their tribesmen in Ghana, in West Africa, and those areas, and they came on the transatlantic slave trade. So they didn't really have the connections to them, and they developed their own unique cultures here. Mm-hmm. But the Asians, they came over. It was more of a migration thing for work and things. So they still maintained their connections to those cultures. So it wasn't coming here to start a new culture. It was coming here to establish an outpost of that culture here. But I don't think Italians were coming to Italy. The original migrants were coming to establish a new Italy in Italy. That wasn't the case. I think they were okay with saying we're tired of Italy, what Italy has become, and we want to be something new. So I think
Well, I was going to say with Italy, it was a little more complicated too, because remember, a lot of the immigrants initially were from the South, and Italy has that whole thing with the Northern and Southern Italians not liking each other. And there was even that political cartoon. It showed all these rats running out of Sicily, and that was the North was always wealthier and more prosperous. So it was, well, we're going to stay here. We have it good. The Southerners are like, wait a minute, we're poor. Let's seek out opportunity. So of course the Sicilians came. I mean, obviously people from the North did too, but they said that's why a lot of Italian American food, it's tomatoes and pastas and things like that, because that's the more southern food originally. The Northerners, I guess, if they saw a better opportunity or business or other things, they came over later. But I think it was the Southerners more initially. So that gets more complicated too.
Yeah, and those cultures are very different. I lived in Italy, I lived in Rome, and I moved out to Turin. And when I was in Turin, one of my flatmates was a pizzica expert from Sicily, down south, and he was playing his dialect of Italian so different from the Turin dialect. Like it's almost a different language. Like that's one thing. Italy might not be the best example because I lived in France too, but not all the way. I would like to go back and travel around, but some of the places are smaller, and I think geographics also changes things. Yeah. And maybe part of Italy having the history of Rome and things like that, and I think that's where the principalities really began. But anyway, there's very different cultures and things like that. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out. With that, it's not they're not all the same. That's also what I would say. Like when you talk about Europeans, it's like, oh, the French. I'm like, what does that mean? There's no. Is there really a thing like French, or were some of these ideas brought up during the world wars because there was a reason to unite in that kind of way, and that's why we've had to sort of maintain this artificial state of war, constant war, where nation states make sense, yet now we're living in a globalized world where nation states don't really apply to the reality of the world anymore. So there's this kind of things that are concerning. Yeah.
Well, it gets complicated too, because with Europe, it's the whole idea of different tribes, fiefdoms, the different histories. Italy wasn't even a united country, I think, till 1800s. And then whereas America, the idea is it's founded based on ideas and anyone can come here. Now, different regions developed based on who settled where. But like you say, some of them had ties to their old places. Certain things sort of became their own thing. Like I know with Cajun food, Cajun is a bastardization of Acadian who came down from Canada. Creole, of course, the Spanish people who came. So you have native influence, Spanish, French, all this. So it kind of became its own thing too, versus like you say with some of these other things, we're maintaining our culture and that's sort of an outpost in another land, as it were.
Yeah. It's tough. Like the EU can't necessarily match what the United States of America has, in part because of moving between the states in the United States of America is a lot more open and possible than it is within the EU. Like there's very massive differences. Like there are differences between Alabama and Massachusetts, for example, but you can move from Massachusetts to Alabama and be Alabama in one generation. But it's not really that easy to move from Sicily to Turin and be Turinese in one generation, let alone from Sicily to Belgium. That's a whole different. Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.